Welcome to our series on presentation skills. Previous videos have included setting the stage, which is about getting started with the process, and designing your presentation, your materials, your slide deck, and your approach. This video will be about the actual delivery of your presentation. So in this presentation, we'll go over the how and why to practice your presentation beforehand and repeatedly. If you're doing a group presentation, particular considerations for doing so effectively. How to stay calm during a presentation, knowing that public speaking is a common fear. How to draw the audience in if it's something that you have time for during a presentation. And how to end your presentation with purpose. Remember, a good presentation is like a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And anyone can become a better presenter or public speaker, and there are some thoughts on how you can do so. So why practice? Well, it's rare that we hit the target right where we want to on the first try. So practice allows us to get closer and closer to our vision for how we want the presentation to go. One of the things that practicing can do is decrease what we call the illusion of familiarity. It could be that you look at your note cards, you look at your slide deck, and you say, I know this, but until you actually walk it through, make your talking points, refer to your visual aids, you don't really know how it's going to go. It creates a polish to your story. It makes the audience feel like they were part of something that was well constructed, well thought out, and whole. By practicing, it increases your actual memory of the talking points, of the data, other sources of information, and that will come through during the final presentation. And it really helps with that seamless transition between your topics and slides, making it very smooth from going from one to another, one slide to another, one point to another, and making connections between them as you go along. And it really can reduce the anxiety when you have those presentation cues, the idea of having a PowerPoint and referring to it, standing up and talking. These are cues that can raise anxiety. The more you do it, the less anxiety can get in your way. Let's talk about group presentations. This is a common experience, but very often the group members don't give careful consideration to what makes for an effective presentation when there's more than one person involved. In the initial video in the series, Setting the Stage, we talked about picking a topic that is of genuine interest to you, that will motivate you to learn as much as you can about it, to be enthusiastic when you are presenting, and it's best if you can find partners that are going to have that same interest so that their enthusiasm comes through as well as their commitment to the topic. When designing and practicing a group presentation, it's critically important to do so together. If each person decides they will design a different chunk, it can have a very different feel when put together in one presentation. And the audience notices that in terms of the amount of information on a slide, the type of images that are used, or other sorts of visual aids. Also, when people practice individually, they tend to only know their piece, which means they don't necessarily understand how it truly fits in with all of the other components of the presentation. So again, it's very important for the group to design the presentation together and practice it together, so when delivered, it is experienced by the audience as carefully constructed from beginning to end. You want to aim for equal distribution. In other words, don't just have one presenter do the introduction and another presenter do 3-4 times as much talking. It should feel equal in terms of the time It should feel equal in terms of the effort. It should feel equal in terms of the contribution to the overall presentation. It's important to try to present with one voice, and this goes back to designing and practicing the presentation together. You have several people potentially, but one voice means you're using similar language, that you're using a similar style, and that regardless of who is presenting at the time, it is consistent for the audience. And again, it's very important to know the entire presentation in terms of your overall knowledge, in terms of timing, in terms of how you can connect concepts together and refer back and forth between what the different presenters shared. It's also important when doing a group presentation to stay present in the moment. Often because presenters are nervous, they might only be on when they're actually talking. And before they talk, perhaps they're looking at their notes, they're looking at their phone. After they talk, they're talking to one of the other presenters or looking back at their notes or their phone. All the attention in a group presentation should be on the person who is presenting in the moment. And so it's important for everyone to stay entirely present and avoid anything that might be distracting. It's also very helpful to record each of your practice sessions. If this is an audio presentation, it can just be done with a cell phone audio app. If it's a video presentation, it also can be done with a cell phone or a laptop or other device that has a webcam. So why record each and every practice session? First of all, you need to test the timing of the presentation. As talked about in the first video on setting the stage, time determines how much you can cover, and it is valuable real estate. You want to make sure that you do the delivery within the amount of time that's allotted while not being rushed, not having too much downtime, and allowing time for question and answer at the end if appropriate. By recording each practice session, you also get another swipe at the information. You get to watch it, you get to hear it, and so that makes it more memorable. It also allows you to take a step back and realize that perhaps there's a better flow that you can create by moving around some of the content, by changing around some of the points, or perhaps you realize that one of the points you tried to make wasn't as clear as you thought it was, and it gives you a chance to make some changes and provide that clarity. You also can recognize by watching or listening to a recording that perhaps you covered too much on one point and too little on another. And for the sake of even distribution and even emphasis, you can go back and make changes in terms of those emphases. It also can give you a sense of what are the points of the presentation that are most difficult for you as a presenter. That is, it might be difficult to remember all the points you wanted to make about it, or it's an aspect of the presentation that whenever you get to it, it tends to trip you up or make you stumble. This allows you to put your energy and your time to where you need to, which is the fine-tuning, so that you can deliver a clear, consistent, polished presentation. Also, it gives you a chance when you listen or watch a recording to recognize when it might be helpful to rephrase a point, perhaps based on your audience. Perhaps somebody in the audience is more of a novice than an expert, and you realize you used examples or language that is more for an expert. So rephrasing something can be helpful. Or perhaps breaking up a point into a few smaller pieces that are more easily explained by you as a presenter, more easily understood by the audience. When reviewing a recorded presentation, it can be helpful to use an observation checklist. Here are some things to be watching and listening for. First, are you speaking at a natural pace, not too fast, not too slow, and in a volume loud enough for your audience to hear you? Are there utterances while you talk? These can be like, and whatnot. Often it's done without our awareness and occurs in between the points that we're making. The more comfortable as a presenter you can be with silence in between your points, the less the utterances will happen. It's also important to watch and see if there are any distracting gestures you may not have been aware you were doing. This could be having your hands in your pockets and jiggling keys. It can be waving your hands, perhaps adjusting your eyeglasses or playing with your hair. This can be distracting to the audience. It's important to try to minimize these. Are you looking ahead at the audience, maintaining eye contact, not looking at your cards, your notes, or spending too much time looking at your slide deck or poster or other visual aid if you're using one? Are you explaining the concepts clearly? If there are terms that need to be defined, did you provide that definition so that your audience has a shared understanding upon which to build with the other information from the presentation? Are you referring to the visual aids on cue? Are you, for example, pointing to the artifact that you brought when you were supposed to, or gesturing to a certain part of the poster if they're with a smaller audience? If using a slide deck, are you talking in line with the bullet that is up on the screen, or the chart, or other image? And did you finish the presentation within the allotted time? Again, you want to avoid having too much time left over, but don't want to run out of time or feel like you had to rush at the end. Let's talk about practicing via Zoom. First of all, you can practice using Zoom as your video recorder. But also, if you are going to be delivering a presentation via Zoom, it's that much more important that you practice with Zoom. First, you want to make sure that the name listed in your profile as a presenter is your full and/or professional name, not a nickname. Secondly, you want to make sure that your microphone and webcam settings are going to be working effectively during your presentation. You want to think about your background, whether that be what's behind you or the virtual background that you might select. It could even be a theme associated with your presentation. You want to test any features that you'll be using. This includes screen sharing, chat, and polling. You want to make sure that you're comfortable with each of these tools, each of these features, so that the technology is just the vehicle you're using for delivering the presentation. It doesn't become an obstacle or a distraction. Let's talk about how to keep calm during a presentation. We acknowledged in the Setting the Stage video that a common fear is presenting or public speaking. Here are some ways to help you stay calm so that you can focus on the presentation as opposed to your response to be doing the presentation. First, arrive early and make sure you have all of your materials. It can be stressful to be looking for a parking space or trying to get logged onto the computer if delivering the presentation remotely. Be early and prepared with your materials. If you're using any sort of technology as part of the presentation, test it well beforehand. Make sure all the different pieces work together and on cue. It gives you a chance as well to see if the internet is going to support all of the platforms you're going to be using. Remove any distractions for yourself as a presenter. That can be your phone. It should be off and away. Any physical clutter around the space where you'll be presenting, whether that be the front of the room, the stage, or the room from where you're presenting if doing so via Zoom. Tap into whatever helps you relax. And these are things that you want to do as part of your practice, is your calming strategies. Some common ways to do this are sipping water at times to allow yourself to pause, to avoid dry mouth, and not be drinking coffee right before or during a presentation because the caffeine can make you even more anxious. Try using what they call the boxed breathing method, or 4-4-4-4. This is inhaling slowly for 4 full seconds, holding your breath for 4 full seconds, exhaling for 4 full seconds, and repeating the cycle so that you've done so 4 times. This can help you focus. It can slow down your breathing, slow down your heart rate, and reduce the feeling of stress or anxiety. And remind yourself, if you've gone through all the steps of preparing, of practicing, that you've got this. When it comes time to actually start your presentation, begin by introducing yourself as a presenter. If there are other presenters in the room, you either can decide ahead of time if one person's going to introduce the whole panel or if each person is going to introduce themselves. Introduce the topic of your story. What is this going to be about? And for those who have watched the Setting the Stage video, what are the big rocks that are going to be covered? In other words, what are going to be the main topics that the audience can expect to hear, see, and learn about? Make sure to mention, if there is going to be an opportunity for questions, how the audience can do so. If you're presenting in person, you can say raise your hand at any time. You could say you can submit a note card, or you can ask the audience to wait until the end if you don't want to interrupt your flow. If presenting virtually, you can do a similar thing. You can say use the raise your hand feature so I can see you have a question. Type your questions into the chat, or please wait until the end. And right at the outset of your presentation, make sure to share if the slide deck that you're using or any other resources are going to be made available. That can help reassure the audience, have them focus on you as a presenter. So as you're presenting, make sure you're watching the time. It should not be a surprise. If you've practiced several times and timed yourself, this becomes less of an issue, but is still important to do. So make sure that somewhere you have a visible clock, or you can recruit someone in the audience to be your timekeeper, to give you a warning by a show of fingers of how many minutes you have remaining. Try to stick to the plan, but if you're getting a sense from the audience that they're confused or they want a bit more information about part of your topic and you can accommodate that, you can be flexible. If you've told the audience that they can ask questions, go ahead and answer those questions that are relevant to your point in the moment and when you know the answer. So it might be that an audience member asks a question and you're going to be getting to that a little bit later in the presentation. It is very acceptable to say, thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually going to be addressing that point in a few slides or in a few minutes. And if you still need more information about that once I cover it, please let me know. It's also important to admit when you don't know the answer. You're not expected to understand or know everything related to your topic, and it is much better for you to say, that is an excellent question, I actually don't know, than to take a shot at trying and answering, and then somebody in the audience realizing that you are wrong. That can disrupt your whole credibility as a presenter on that topic. Make sure to take natural pauses. That allows you to avoid some of the utterances and allows some of the information to sink in. And throughout the presentation, remember to breathe. If you have time to include audience participation as part of your presentation, there are a number of reasons why that can be effective. And thinking about the goals of participation can be useful. First, it can make the audience feel welcome. It also can keep them attentive and engaged from start to finish of your presentation. It also can create a working with experience as opposed to a talking at experience. It feels like you're working together with members of the audience to understand the material and to go through the story from beginning to end. It also can increase the understanding and memory of the presentation topic as well as of you as a presenter. If you are going to have the audience participate as part of your presentation, there are a number of different ways of doing so. Here are some examples. You can ask for individual volunteers. Perhaps you're going to demonstrate something at the front of the room, and it would be helpful for somebody to come up and assist. Or perhaps you pose a question to the entire audience and ask who has an example they'd like to share. Who has an experience that they think is relevant to this? If you have enough time, you can create timed breakout groups. For example, saying, for the next 5 minutes, I'd like you to talk at your table about how this is relevant to your current life, or talk with the people who are sitting around you for a few minutes, and then I will bring us back together as an entire group. You can do an activity called Think, Pair, Share, which starts with a prompt. I'd like you each to think about this for a few minutes. Then I'd like you to choose one partner, have a conversation about your responses, and then we're going to ask for volunteers to share out to the larger group. You can initiate a brief writing prompt, which allows everyone to process their thoughts and make connections for a few minutes in silence, and then again ask for volunteers for sharing. You could launch an instant poll, and there are a few different ways of doing this depending on whether you're doing this in a physical space or whether you're doing it live via a platform via Zoom. But the point of doing a poll can be different depending on the presentation topic and the audience. It could be that you want to try to gauge the audience's interest, experience, or knowledge to give you a better sense as a presenter what you need to focus on in the moment. Perhaps you need to provide some more background information or clarification. Also, it can be helpful in the moment to collect data from your actual participants there in the audience and then share it back to them. So you could have them, for example, answer just a few questions and then put up on the screen what the responses are. Here are some examples of polling strategies or platforms. The first is to do so via Zoom. It is important that if you're going to be polling in Zoom, that you create the poll before the presentation. You launch it when you'd like the participants to answer, and then you can share the data right back in the moment with the entire group. If physically in the room, or if having people in different places, it also can be helpful to use a in-the-moment tool like Poll Everywhere. Poll Everywhere has an app for the phone, as well as can be done live with a laptop or other computer. Again, very much like with the Zoom poll, it can be very helpful to have that poll designed ahead of time so that it's seamless for you to launch in the moment and then share the results back with your audience. Lastly, you can ask for a show of hands. How many in the audience think this? How many in the audience experienced that? It allows for that shared moment with everyone there, as well as good information for you as the presenter. As you get near the finish of your presentation, it's important to end with purpose. Just like any good story, a good presentation has an intentional beginning, middle, and end. With a presentation, there could be a number of purposes, and each one has value. A common purpose is the opportunity to restate your main idea, driving it home, making the connection between the beginning of your presentation where you introduce the main idea and now the wrap-up. And since you are bringing your presentation to a close, that is not the best time to introduce new information. If you have new information you think would be helpful for the audience, that could be provided in the takeaways or for more information portion of your presentation without it taking away some of the precious time that you have. It gives you a chance to summarize the intended takeaways, what you hope the audience got out of that presentation experience. This presentation, for example, was on delivering the presentation. So my hope is that some of your takeaways are that you now have a sense of the importance of practice, you understand some of the considerations if doing a group presentation, and have an idea of what to look for and listen for if you record your practice sessions. Providing the audience with an outlet for learning more. That again can be handouts, other resources, websites that they may want to check out, or even professional organizations if interested in learning more about the topic. And if you have time, allow for a Q&A period, particularly if you told the audience at the beginning of the presentation that you'd prefer that they hold their questions until the end. Lastly, try to elicit feedback. Send out a survey to those who were in the audience to give you feedback on not just the content of your presentation, but also your style and anything that might be helpful as you continue towards building your presentation skills. There are a number of different ways to build these skills, as anyone can become a more effective presenter. You can take a class such as acting for non-majors or public speaking. If you have a job where there are meetings or conferences, seek out the opportunities at work for doing presentations. Try to observe presenters in different settings. Try to make sure that you're paying attention again to their content, as well as their style, as well as their visual aids, all the different components of putting together an effective presentation. Join an organization like the Toastmasters, whose purpose is to provide opportunities for people to hone their presentation skills. Watch some TED Talks or other YouTube presentations. And, of course, practice, practice, practice. Just like any skill in life, the more we practice and then reflect and practice again, the better we will become. Thank you for watching this video on delivering your presentation. We hope you found it helpful, as well as the other videos in our presentation skills series.